always good to ground us in the work of the collaborative working group and the intent, which is to be a sounding board for the Bureau to review preliminary drafts, which we'll get into today. Looking at land use scenarios and policy choices that'll set our employment growth expectations for the next 20 or so years. As you all know, we are seeking deeper understanding. We're seeking active listening and transparency. Consensus is not the purpose of this group. We'll flag it if it seems like maybe there's some cohesion coming together in opinions, but most importantly, for collaborative working group members is to make sure your perspectives and opinions are surfaced so we can take those into account and as things move on. So for our meeting, we always ask that you actively listen to better understand one another's concerns, city's concerns and issues being raised, build knowledge of the economic opportunity analysis and policy choices, provide feedback on a set of scenarios and draft evaluation criteria, which I just mentioned, and then collaborate to identify areas of common interest, potential win-win policy options, or at least find that balance that we're all seeking. So with that, I'd like to do a round of introductions as we've done the last couple of times. I'd like to introduce city staff first. You all will have to help me. There's new names popping in all the time. So if I miss you as city staff, please just flag that for me. Then we'll introduce collaborative work group members, and then our visitors will ask you to introduce yourself. As always, just, your name and affiliation connection to this work will be helpful. So with that, Tom, I'm going to hand it to you.
Yep. Hi, I'm Tom Armstrong. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a supervising planner here at BPS.
Good morning, everyone. Patricia Diefenser for Chief Planner here in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, working with this team and overseeing our long-range land use planning work for the city. And I use she, her pronouns.
Prince Acedo, a senior planner. Yes, and I use he pronouns. Sam Burkham, he, him pronouns. I'm a
Daniel
Sobing, environmental planner at BPS. Preferred pronouns are he and him.
I'm Jeff Cottle. I manage the river environmental team here at Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So we do long range planning for natural resources.
My name is Juliet Bechtel. I'm an environmental planner under Jeff's team.
And then I'm going to move online, and if you all can just help me, maybe popcorn if you know one another, but I think Emily, your city staff, yes? Oh, are you there?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Emily Hebburn. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the policy advisor to Portland City Council President Alana Pirtle-Giddy. And I'll popcorn to Maria. I believe you're on here. Okay, if not Maria, I'll popcorn to Ludwig.
Hey, good morning. My name is Ludwig Salzman, he, him pronouns, and I am with the Bureau of Environmental Services and a planner in that team. And I'll pass it on to Ethan.
I'm Ethan Brown with Bureau of Environmental Services, he, him pronouns, also a planner with Ludwig. And I'll popcorn to Julia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Michelle, economic planner working under Tom's team. And I'll popcorn to Marco.
Hi, everyone. Marco Mejia. I use he, him, el pronouns, and I'm the community engagement strategist for BPS. And I'll pass it to, I cannot read the names that are so little on my screen, sorry.
Oh, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Merrill. I'm the Metals and Machinery Industry Liaison for Prosper Portland.
Melanie, thank you. Ronnie. Oh, Ronnie, sorry.
Hey, I'll jump in. Ronnie Boyle, Bureau of Environmental Services.
Any other city staff? Thank you all for helping through that. And guess I'll start in, oh, sorry, collaborative work group members, pardon me. So why don't I start with Benton?
Hi, Benton Strong. My day job's at Vigor.
Glad you're here. Heather?
Heather King. I'm the co-executive director in Lower Atlanta.
Corky Collier with Columbia Corridor Association.
Great. And Sherry?
Hi, Sherry Duncan, Yakima Nation, senior fish biologist and restoration ecologist.
Glad you're here. Thank you, Sherry. Micah?
Micah Meskel, Bird Alliance of Oregon, Urban Conservation Director.
Thank you. Steph?
Steph Rouse, she, they, planning liaison. Hello.
Hello. Glad you're there, Steph.
And commission.
Oh, and commission, right, of course. Any other community?
Cassie.
Oh, Cassie, great. Let's see, is she?
Yes.
Cassie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good morning. We were just wrapping up introductions of collaborative working group members. Would you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Sure. Although I wasn't positive that there was still a collaborative working group. I thought our commitments had ended a while back.
This
But,
is still
yeah.
this is still the collaborative working group.
Okay. Cassie Cohen, Executive Director of Portland Harbor Community Coalition.
Thank you. And sorry for the confusion. We can chat about that later if you'd like. Okay, now on to guests in the room. And again, you all will have to help me with that. Susie?
Susie Lassen, consultant, Working Waterfront Coalition.
That's you.
I'm Marty Glickman. I'm a volunteer for the Tributary Alliance.
I guess I probably should have gone with the staff.
Okay.
There, with Councilor Green's office.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm sorry for not capturing you earlier.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Right. It's a 3-ring circus around here sometimes. So give me just a second to get caught up with who we haven't heard from yet here. Julie Wolf.
Hi, I'm Julie Wolf, and I'm a volunteer with the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. Debbie, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Debbie Silva with Oregon Steel Mills, and also a board member of Working Waterfront Coalition and Columbia Corridor Association. Thanks.
You and Tom.
Hey, good morning. Tom Bullion with the Port of Portland. Just listening in this morning. Thank you.
Glad you're here. Did I miss anyone? Oh, Maria, I'm sorry, I missed you. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, Maria Sippin, they or she pronouns, Counselor Mitch Green's office, Chief of Staff.
Thank you for being here and thank you all for helping me through that. So this morning, staff are going to give just a brief overview to get us again grounded in where we are in the project, talk about where we're headed, and then the primary purpose of today will be talking about the industrial areas and industrial policy options and getting your feedback on those. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom to take it away.
Okay. All right, so yeah, again, the purpose of today's meeting is to really focus back on the industrial areas, talk a little bit about some of the investment strategy ideas that we've come up with, and then look through various scenarios in terms of how we balance, choose different policy options, natural resource protections, economic development investments, community impacts, and begin to look at how those different choices interact with each other and what that means for the industrial land capacity, which is the currency of the EOA and stuff. Yeah.
Interject one small thing. So since we have a lot of people here today and a lot of different people here today, just wanted to kind of contextualize this meeting. Last meeting, we talked about all of the other geographies, employment geographies of the city. So just reminding us all that industrial is one of many different employment geographies of the city where we have different kinds of jobs in all of those different employment districts. And as we know, the focus of this group's discussions have been on the industrial land because, as Tom always points out, and I think we'll point out, the industrial land is the area where we have the tightest supply. And it's also the area where we have some of the more important policy considerations to try to balance. So just want to remind the group that while, we're zooming back into the industrial land, we did have a conversation, I think a really good conversation for those who weren't here at the last meeting about different strategies to encourage jobs in all of the employment districts, or maybe all the other employment districts. And so now we're going to focus back in on it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, and as Deb mentioned, we're looking for your feedback on sort of two levels. One is, and Corky pointed this out earlier, is the information we're presenting, is it understandable? What kinds of information should we be presenting and pulling together and looking at to make an informed decision? And are there different impacts or different elements to these policy options that we should be considering, that the Planning Commission and City Council are going to want to know about? And so that is a sort of more of a technical, I guess, question about, is this making sense? How can we better explain it? What additional information we need? And then the second part of this is sort of more of the substantive policy discussion, which is we have a wide range of objectives that we want to achieve in these industrial areas. What are the shared interests? Where can we find the win-win solutions? What are these options, are realistic in terms of sort of being achievable and resulting in good outcomes? And so, sort of more so in the second half of the discussion this morning, where can we find that balancing of objectives that the policy framework is telling us to do both, right? To protect natural resources and provide for economic development. How do we do that? What do you see as the opportunities to do both? Just to give you a reminder of where we're at in this process. We've been this spring, we've been working with you all. We've been drafting what we call a discussion draft. As we put all of these elements, the forecast, the buildable land inventory, the policy options, the strategies, they're all coming together in a discussion draft that we're shooting to have ready by the end of this month. And we'll use that discussion draft to kick off and be the focus of a broader community outreach to get a wider range of views on these policy choices. And we'll do that sort of August, September. And then I think what our plan is now is to reconvene this group in October and really share what we've heard and what we've learned from that outreach and begin to hone in on a proposed alternative, selecting a single one, as staff, our best take on how to do that balancing of objectives, and get some feedback from you all before we publish what we call a proposed draft. And that'll happen this fall. And that is what the proposed draft is, what goes to the Planning Commission. And then the Planning Commission will hold hearings and take testimony, and they will deliberate and make a recommendation to council. And then we'll do it all over again at council. with additional hearings and testimony and council deliberations that will hopefully take place sometime next spring. And that will wrap up this phase of it, but what the strategies are designed to be is the next steps, the action plan. How do we realize this economic opportunity? How do we generate that job growth? Again, this is a slide, I think, from our first meeting. You know, there is a series of policy frameworks at the state level, at the regional level, in our own comprehensive plan that is telling us to both protect natural resources and have a strong economy. And those are the confluence here in these industrial areas with the Willamette River, the Columbia Slough, that those two policies really compete with each other. And our goal through all of this is to find that balance, to do both, to do economic development and to promote watershed health. So I just ask you to keep in mind that sort of the challenge that we have is how do we do that balance? What is that right balance between those different policy objectives? Some of the I guess the values, the goals that we see in this is you know, wanting to create accessible, high quality jobs. As part of that, and as part of that sort of economic development and growth, you know, having clear and consistent and predictable regulations, so everybody understands and knows what to expect. We want to do that in a way that also protects the natural habitat, contributes to our climate goals, contributes to community health, and at the same time have productive employment lands. So focusing on what the EOA is, just as a reminder, it is a employment forecast as to what we think we can expect for Portland in terms of job growth. That's it at the core of it, and that job growth generates a certain amount of building space and land need, capacity, room to grow to accommodate those jobs. And then, you know, we go through an analysis to determine if we have enough land, suitable land to meet that need. And again, when we get into these other policy decisions, they have an impact on that land availability. And so how do we factor those in? As we've said this morning, we're focusing in on the industrial areas. That's the Portland Harbor, the Rivergate area, the Columbia Corridor. The Columbia Corridor and out to what we call the East Columbia area, the area east of I-205 along Airport Way. Our the employment forecast, the updated employment forecast is for 29,600 jobs in these industrial areas. I will also say, you see here in purple what we call the dispersed employment areas. We have, you know, scattered sites throughout the city, the Brooklyn Yards, the area around I-205 and Foster Boulevard. There's some industrial employment land along I-84. Those are dispersed throughout those tend to be what we call the general employment zoning, the EG zoning. And some heavier industrial zoning like around Brooklyn Yards. That's sort of the fourth industrial geography that's sitting out there. But what you see here is the updated job forecast of 29,000 jobs. And it's important to realize these are industrial areas, but the industrial areas have a mix of jobs. They're predominated by industrial jobs, manufacturing jobs, warehouse and transportation. But there's also headquarters, back office jobs. There's a little bit of retail scattered in there. There's some education facilities in there. So each of the geographies in the EOA have a different mix of jobs, but they're dominated by one sector, right? If you think about the central city, dominated by office jobs, there's also retail and hospitality and a little bit of industrial jobs in the Lower Albina area and the Central East Side. So each of these areas has a different mix, but for the most part, most of the jobs are here most of the industrial jobs in the industrial areas are that sort of manufacturing, industrial service, and transportation and warehouse.
Tom?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm very clear. In the 29.6, that's jobs in the industrial area, non-industrial jobs.
Right. And when you see the discussion draft, we have many more tables that look at each of the sectors and drive that mix that is going to each of these geographies. And you can begin to see like, 10% of the jobs in the industrial area are actually retail jobs. And you'll be able to see the different sectors. It doesn't play very well on a slide like this.
That makes sense. I'm sure it's not as granular though as to say like, you can look at retail, but you probably can't look at, say, counting jobs that exist in an industrial business versus a non-industrial business.
I don't think so. We can look at that. And so then the next step that we do is that we take that job forecast and we look at recent development trends to come up with jobs per acre in terms of to get us from jobs to land demand, jobs to acres. And these are averages across all types of businesses in the industrial areas. And you can see here that they range, and the dispersed employment areas have more intensive jobs than some of the other areas. But this sort of sets that baseline land demand at down here in the right-hand corner of 1,100 acres. So taking the base employment forecast, looking at what kinds of building square footage and how those buildings sit on the land, we come up with a base land demand of 1,100 acres. That's the demand side of the equation. On the supply side of the equation, what we call the buildable land inventory, we are looking at all of the parcels in the industrial areas, looking at what's developed, what are some of the constraints on future development, what the market data, the recent development trends are telling us about how land develops, what type of land develops. And we put those through a model that then begins to identify which parcels are essentially available, what we think will be available for development over time, over the next 20 years. And to that we apply, and that sort of winds up with what we call a gross acres of just think of site acres. And then to that we apply some constraint factors that get at the difficulty in developing that land. Would be that those are shown on the next slide. So we look at things that it might be a barrier to development. So does it have brownfield contamination? Does it have steep slopes? Is it in the floodplain? Does it lack sewer infrastructure? And so for each of these, you just think of them as sort of friction that hold back the development feasibility of those sites. And we apply discount factors for each of these constraints in a way that gives us net development capacity. So another way to think about this, what's available, what's the supply, is we start with all 14,000 acres of industrial land that's zoned for industrial or employment uses. Take out what we think are the fully developed parcels. They've got a business on it. It's in active use. That gives us about 2,400 acres of vacant and underutilized land. And then we apply those constraint factors, and that nets us out right now at about 1,100 acres of capacity. So we're pretty close. That's sort of the tightness of the industrial land supply. But that is the starting point for we are considering a whole bunch of other policy choices that impact that 1,100 acres. And some increase that capacity and some take away from that capacity. And again, this is sort of the ledger sheet that we're trying to balance through this EOA process. I'm gonna pause there and see if there are any questions up to this point. All right, so that's the accounting that we're trying to do through this EOA. When we look at the bundles of policy options, decisions that we want to consider through this process. So the under the statewide planning goals, under goal 9, they're saying, the cities must show they have, a 20-year land supply to accommodate expected job growth. And so we're right there. I would say close enough. And what we need to look at is, in terms of future decisions, we always have to sort of look back. And if we're going to make a decision like expanding natural resource protection, that's going to sort of take us below the line. Or if we make investments like in brownfield cleanup, that'll take us above that line. And how do we sort of, account for those policy decisions and understand what the various impacts are? And so what we've done is we've bundled those policy choices into a different scenarios. And then we looked at sort of the different combinations, right? One is, okay, we're gonna do just a little bit on all of those policy outcomes. What will that give us? Whereas say 4 is like, we're really gonna lean into this, we're gonna do lots of natural resource protection, and we're gonna couple that with lots of investment in economic development programs. And so trying to understand that relative degree of emphasis, what does that do to our land capacity? So just as a reminder, we'll go through each of these policy bundles, and we'll spend a little bit more time on these investment strategies. to sort of get your reaction and make sure that we're not missing any big opportunities. And then we'll just quickly recap, the natural resource protection measures and the community impact industrial edge measures before we come back to those combinations. So in terms of investment strategies, we sort of have two different categories. One we're calling process improvements. So how can we speed up, better support the permitting process, the development. Some of these we're borrowing from the work that's been done on the housing side lately. But things and many of these ideas are coming out of the two studies that we've been working on over the last year, the industrial land readiness study and the brownfield analysis that was done in parallel to that. Some of, that first one, sort of fast tracking industrial permits, giving industrial permit review sort of the same priority that affordable housing gets now. One thing that came to light is the need to be able to do concurrent reviews. Right now, under our system, you have to finish one permit before you can do the next. So I have to, before I can apply for the next one. So I have to say I'm demolishing an old building or an old house on a site. I have to finish the demolition and get that all signed off before I can submit my grading plan. And then I got to do the grading before I can submit my foundation plan. And where often you could be doing the demolition and submit your grading plan and have that reviewed so that it's ready to go when the demolition is finished and signed off on. So there's some time savings in there. The other one is, other cities have programs where if a developer wants, say there's a shared infrastructure facility like a traffic signal, that's going to benefit many surrounding property owners. Right now, you kind of got to wait for PBOT to get the money together to build that traffic signal. In other cities, developers can front that cost and pay for the building of that traffic signal. And then as other properties around that traffic signal develop, they actually pay back the developer money. Seattle has this type of program that can help get needed infrastructure in place, but it's not always the cost of that is not fully put on the burden of the first developer that shows up. Another one is just some of the work that we've done through the industrial land readiness study with Prosper Portland is just keeping together a priority list of available sites, looking at how that fits with infrastructure investment, other permitting, navigation, and just really sort of reinforcing Prosper's work in sort of trying to match businesses seeking sites with available sites and just having a robust program, that is staffed and maybe comes with some infrastructure investment to get those sites ready for development. So when a business shows up looking for a site, and that's not just businesses coming from outside the region or outside the city. We have a lot of movement as businesses, existing businesses grow and expand. They're going to want to move sites, or they're going to want to add to their sites, or they're going to build a satellite site nearby. So this is one that sort of benefits everybody. In terms of investments in financial investments or incentives, some of the ones that we've identified are looking at SDC deferrals, which are available on the housing side and where right now, when you pull a building permit, you're required to pay those SDCs up front. For housing, we allowed a deferral of up to 2 years or when you finalize your building permit. So closer to the time that you're open and ready for business. And so, we can look at deferral programs like that. I think a big one around brownfields is coming up with cleanup incentives to help defer some of the costs of the cleanup. And this could be, last time around, we looked at a local tax abatement program. Business Oregon has programs. We've been talking to them about what is it that the city could do to help property owners better access the Business Oregon funding, to get more of those dollars deployed here in Portland. On the Superfund side of things, the city has been active in trying to move that forward. We've done upfront work on design for the mitigation measures. We could continue to sort of lean in to accelerate that process, and to move things forward closer to get the cleanup going and underway, with the idea that we know that the cleanup is going to take a long time, but we want to get to this point where the cleanup starts and essentially the liability for the cost of that cleanup is allocated, and that will allow EPA to then issue what's called protective purchaser agreements. And so new investors, new developers, new business owners that want to work in the harbor can have some protection against that cleanup liability.
Cassie, do you have a question?
Well, just whenever, Tom, whenever you're done, I've got
All
some
right,
thoughts.
just one more and then
All
we'll
right.
get back to you.
Thank
The
you.
last one has to do with freight infrastructure, transportation. There are really two opportunities right there. The first is prioritizing some major freight projects. We did this last time around as part of the EOA. We identified some key points on the freight system that were bottlenecks. We did, and then we designed projects to address that. There's the Time Oil Road that had the overpass built over the railroad. That, trucks were being blocked behind a railroad crossing. PBOT did a project to build an overpass that helped provide better access to all of the land and businesses on the other side of that rail line. So right now, PBOT is starting their transportation system plan update process. This is where they begin to set the priorities for transportation projects for the next probably 7 to 10 years. So that's an opportunity to identify and prioritize some freight projects. The other one has to do with what we call local improvement districts. And that is where, again, PBOT has a program that has staffing that help organize property owners along an unimproved street. Organize them, the property owners, help pay for the street improvements. But it's an opportunity to get all of those improvements done at once rather than segment by segment as each property owner comes in. These LIDs have been very successful and the main role for PBOT is to organizing the transportation, the sewer, the water lines, the stormwater, and get all of that lined up. And then you have a larger segment of improved streets, and they've shown that leads to increased development on either side of that longer street segment rather than piecemeal improvements. So we can lean into that program. I'm going to stop there and just get your thoughts and ideas about, are we missing anything? Are there other opportunities we should be looking at that can really support businesses, either the existing ones expand or new businesses locate in this area? And then why don't we go back to Cassie?
Hi, I've got some questions and comments. So first question is, if you like truncate the time to get multiple permits, what does that mean around public comment? So that hoping that like the city would never like reduce the public comment opportunities.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And then also I think like there really should not, ideally, like if you make some changes here, that they should not apply to industry expansion that that could have health or add to health or environmental burdens. I just think that should be you should work that into it, because I can guarantee none of the community members that have been involved in this process we all support expansion of industry, but clean industry, right? Industry that's not going to continue to perpetuate the environmental harms or contaminations. So that's one point I want to convey. The other point I'm curious about is with let's see, the when a property is foreclosed, like when an industrial property is foreclosed and then it goes up for auction, the current policy that the city has seems to be antiquated. Unlike most municipalities, the city will, rather than like, if, for example, there's a foreclosed property that's up for auction along the Portland Harbor, an upland site, it doesn't get acquired in the first auction, the city, rather than like reduce the cost of that site, will increase the cost of that site because they keep adding fines and fees that they hope to get paid off. And that de-incentivizes prospective purchasers from taking on, that type of site. I mean, we are experiencing that real time with a site right now, and we've been told that like there's other cities where they do everything possible to facilitate getting those sites put into productive use, community benefit use, everything they can. And the current policy at City Portland does not support that. So that's another question I have. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, number 3 is just around the, I can't help it but to say like, with the Montgomery Park area plan, there was a new formula that was used for the first time around capturing the value of, when that zoning change happened, to make sure that there can be community benefits as part of the development. So how can that same value capturing be translated to collecting the fees, the surcharge fees and, integrated into getting new, integrated as by, in getting new industrial uses, but how do you create benefits, community benefits and incentives for integrating natural habitat, right? So that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. What you were saying about the foreclosure process, those are the kinds of ideas we're looking for. Like, yeah, we could go figure out, how could the city be doing better with that? Whether that's freeing up that land for habitat restoration or for economic development, but clearing those clouds. In terms of the permitting process, I think what we're looking at is mostly of what happens on the building permit side of the process, which doesn't have public comment notice types requirements. We're not looking at the land use permits and wouldn't, as part of this, not looking at reducing public comment as part of that streamlining, if you will.
Yeah, we're not looking at land use reviews, right?
Yeah.
Development reviews, like if people are building a new building and they need to go through some kind of development review process, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the building permits that people pull just to do normal activity. And that's, those are administrative processes that don't have public comments.
Other
Well, maybe they
ideas?
should,
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, maybe they should have public comments too, because I know that there's been concern about certain expansions in the industrial zone.
Okay.
Other ideas on investment strategies, questions about the ones that are here, clarifications, issues? For group members.
Micah's got.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Micah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got two. One is around targeting the incentives, and I'm wondering if staff has considered hyper targeting them on the most dense job. The most dense job producing sort of zoning of sorts, of especially if you go back to slides 10, where you demonstrate that the dispersed employment areas have the highest job rate per acre. And so really using our incentives to increase jobs first and foremost. So prioritizing those incentives towards those land uses. Is that considered?
Yeah, and I think, the best example of that is, Prosper Portland has, a program. Kate Merrill is here on the call today. They're the metals specialists, and that sort of comes out of this idea of targeted industries that we're trying to recruit, where Portland has a strength in. Has many businesses already here, and seem like ripe opportunities for expanded job growth there. So I think it's done more on a sort of industry sector level rather than a geography. But yes, I get what you're saying about targeting some of those incentives on the most intensive job producers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then my second question is, so back on the slide where you discount or create the utilization rate for where you're accounting for all the constraints, whether it's environmental, whether it's environmental or infrastructure needs or contamination. And then you note the ownership piece. So my assumption is that's like absentee owners or even like land speculators. or even like other public ownership. And I'm curious what strategies you have there to within the current draft concept to sort of crack that nut. And yeah, I think I have some ideas around sort of peer-to-peer education and outreach strategy that that folks around this table can take in that space. And I also to really avail those landowners of the incentives that we are proposing through this, and hopefully implement through this, but also for us to consider some on the stick side of the equation of further considering, especially for maybe some of the other public owners or just land speculators who are sitting on properties that could be developed, to really think about some stick incentives to move folks into movement, whether it's selling or developing those parcels.
Okay.
You? I saw Corky's hand and then
Corky, go ahead.
Real quick, and I think the answer to this is you're already doing this, but I want to make sure that these are examples. Really what you're talking about, I think, is developing a better culture, changing an attitude toward those businesses where we can identify shared goals. This is good for the city. Let's take brownfields, for example. If I clean up a brownfield, it's good for the environment. It's good for the city. It's good for the property owner. It's good for everybody. How do we get there? So yeah, let's make sure if we highlight that these are simply examples of the shared goals. The foreclosure cost that Cassie brought up is another good one. We want to get this property sold and into somebody's hands. So that's a shared goal. We can then staff, if they have a little leeway, a little elbow room, they can focus on that. The jobs per acre is another good one where, and a little bit of a warning, jobs per acre on industrial sites are relatively low. Manufacturer may only be 16 jobs per acre. That's horrible, right? Well, how many jobs per acre on a national level on average? How many jobs per acre of a university is? 8. Does that mean universities are not good? No. So again, there is a shared goal there that staff with a little room can focus and get us to that.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity with all of these strategies is basically, as part of the EOA to highlight them, it's essentially can be a council endorsement. Like, these are the things we want to do, an acknowledgement. Here's a starting point, and then it becomes direction to us. Like, go figure out how to do this, and so that's the opportunity beyond crunching all the numbers. The real opportunity is around how are we going to realize these jobs?
All right.
And what should the city be doing about that?
Yeah. Just one second. Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm cutting everyone off today. Benton, and then I'm going to go to Sherry, then Cassie. Benton, go.
So I don't want to get on a rabbit hole on this one, but I think the jobs per acre comment is from both these folks that a lot of them about the importance of looking at the whole picture for things of this nature, right? Because these higher density areas are likely supportive of the lower density businesses. So it's very important that we recognize who is the multiplier when we consider incentive programs. And I actually think it's a great idea to look at both of them, right? Because the big businesses also cannot exist without those small businesses, right? But you got to look at a large facility on the river, for example, is probably supporting 20 smaller facilities that are higher density than them, and they are interdependent on each other. So those incentives have to move both directions. I think one thing that was kind of put up, and I will actually say, because I own Kate's on that Prosper did this for bigger at one point, is some potential for a single point of contact within the city as a service provider for permitting processes at each level of government within Oregon. We actually did this as a project related to our Clackamas and Portland facilities, and Prosper was very helpful, but it was a one-off type of thing. There was a very specific program that we have to deal with the city, county, sometimes metro, and obviously the state. It would be helpful to not have to do that through 4 separate processes, right? Even if it's just a person, we know we have to deal with it at each level, but if there was a person that could help, that would speed up a lot of our work. And recognize that within our companies, we typically don't have personnel. It's one person with our company dealing with it, right? Trying to manage 5 or 6 people at every different level. So I think that'd be really helpful. And then culture wise, I couldn't agree with Corky's point more. I think we're running into a practical challenge and the timing of doing this, that a few of these things are going to hit a multi-year budget cycle, which is highly problematic for what we're suggesting. So I would want to make sure, particularly given our new process, and I'm a little bit looking at some of the council representatives that are in this meeting now, that like I've been through this process before, the money can come out while the process stays in, right? And so how we make sure that that does not happen through our process is kind of critical.
Great suggestions. But I just wanted to clarify something you said about the multiplier effect and who's causing the multiplier effect, the businesses. Can you just speak to that a little bit more? Are the larger businesses which may have a lower dwelling, dwelling is great. Think about it. Sorry, that's usually lower jobs per acre. Are they supporting the types of businesses that have the higher?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of this. So Vigor, just use Vigor as an example. On any given day, there are 600 to 800 employees who are direct employees of Vigor working at our facility. Those are the employees that count to our site, right? That would be considered an industrial employer. At the same time, there are probably just as many subcontractors, customer employees, et cetera, working at our facility. And they would be counted most likely to the parcel that is the base of their facility, which is mostly just an office that they go to check in for the day and they come to Vigor, right? So it could be a 200 person business that they just pick up their truck and they drive to Vigor. So that's a high density business, but actually we were the multiplier for that company, right? So we need to invest in that company. We cannot exist without that company. But at the same time, if we didn't exist, neither would they, right? That's what I'm trying to make sure we don't miss that connection.
Do you have data behind that?
We can tell you that in the harbor businesses have about a 3-to-1 multiplier. So every one job within a harbor business generates about 3 jobs outside of our business.
Yeah.
And if I may, more generally too, jobs per acre is a great number to look at. It's great data, but it's not the shared goal. The shared goal that Tom is speaking to in this case is going to be equity of jobs. You know, is it a family wage job? I could go on and on with the list. You know, so I can go to most other sectors have more jobs per acre. They don't have as much equity. They don't have family wage jobs. They don't have, you know, so what are the shared goals? Jobs per acre is a data point, but it's not the shared goal.
Thank you. Sherry, you put your hand down, but I want to come back to you in case you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, it's more of a question, and I'm not sure the timing is appropriate, but I want to get a better understanding because on this slide, I'm looking at Clomer permits, I'm looking at land use, I'm seeing the permitting program. And then on a previous slide, I saw it was the inverted pyramid and it had GIS layers and whatnot. I'm curious how the FEMA BIOP 170-foot riparian buffer zone fits into this whole assessment and approach when getting at areas for restoration and conservation.
Yeah, so it's coming up, you know, as part of these natural resource policy options, but that's where, you know, that's where the sort of added regulatory burden of those the floodplain regulations is a constraint on development, and that's where we discount the capacity. So if you think about the floodplain regulations requiring what, a 5% habitat area set aside. Well, if I'm looking at a 10-acre parcel now, you know, a half acre of that is sort of no longer available for development. And we would discount parcels that fall, that are impacted by that regulation, by that amount.
Okay, so you
to-
did work in the FEMA BIOP and the no net loss and those sorts of regulations.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And is that shown in figures and on maps where we can view it?
Yeah, it will be. We don't have it teed up for today, but when we publish the discussion draft and the supporting maps, you'll be able to see that detailed information.
Okay, and we'd be able to see it at the full level before the discount happens? Like maybe two, which would be helpful.
That's already online. Like you can see where the floodplain affects various properties by the mapping that we have, right, Jeff? I mean, so I think we're not sure exactly how you're wanting to see it.
I think let's get there, and when we publish all the maps and then you know, we can follow up with you and walk through it and make sure that we have that kind of information available.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Jeff Cottle. I think another piece of it is that, so we have a separate project, the Columbia Corridor and Industrial Lands E-Zone project, which will go to more of the detail of those types of things. I think when we think about as we refer to them as constraints and that utilization rate there, I think having clarity on what are the constraint rates, the utilization rates that we use for the different zones might be informative in terms of what you're asking. I think in terms of how we translate the requirements to certain areas based on the different regulations in the environmental zone. But this Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands project, we will look at each individual resource site and have where the resources are, including floodplain and the riparian buffer area, which will be part of the new requirements as a part of in the context of the EOA, but in the CCIL project. So that will all be broken down from an environmental perspective, another large document that will specifically be about environmental zoning and changes, proposed potential considerations for changes to the environmental zoning in the corridor.
As a direct follow-up to this.
Yep.
The utilization rate discount is on the vacant underutilized land.
Yes.
But the policy we are discussing, and then potentially some other regulation that relates to opportunity for expansion would impact existing
Yes.
uses.
Yeah.
So how do we account for potential loss there?
We as we did, if you think way back, 18 months ago, we're going to try and show both.
Okay.
Like what's the impact to the buildable land inventory? What's to the impact to the entire industrial land base? And to give an idea of, is it a little bit of an impact? Like, is it an incremental change or is it a big, have more significant impact? And you'll be able to see that, as Jeff's saying, is, we as part of the E-zones, we've been doing all of those online maps where you can look at each site and see where the different lines are, but then also sort of in charts and tables, this many properties have a change of plus or minus 10% or plus or minus 30%, kind of thing.
So
to understand what you're getting at both sides, because they do impact the entire industrial land base.
So one thing this could be very complicated, but something like a 170 foot setback, for example, might not have an immediate impact on the business. Maybe not what we're accounting for that.
Yeah.
Maybe not totally in perpetuity, but like that is going to be relevant to understanding.
I think the calculations that we would do would speak to that, because it doesn't matter when someone wants to do infill on their site, it's acknowledgement of where and how much a floodplain, for example, is impacting that site. So it would be reflected.
Hi, this is Kate. I'm on the call, and Benton, when you turn your head, we can't hear you. You have to like talk towards the
Sorry.
front of the room.
Where's the microphone?
We don't know where the microphone is, but that is very helpful,
Sorry,
Kate. Thank you so much. And thank you to Cassie and Steph for being patient. Cassie, did you have a question or something to add to that conversation?
Let's see. It's a little like earlier that I had a thought, but I can just put it out there just because we met with Patricia and Eric a while back to talk about tribal consultation. And so I'm wondering how tribal consultation, Patricia, how you see tribal consultation like playing into this, into the future, EOA and into the sites.
Yeah, so Cassie,
Yeah.
we have sent letters working with the Office of Government Relations. We have sent letters to each of the tribes and the urban native groups, both, to, alerting them to a number of different projects that we believe they may have some interest in, and we've invited them to let us know if they would like any follow-up briefings or meetings or have any further discussion. So those letters are out there. We've had a few acknowledgements of receipt of the letters. We've had a couple of, of the tribes say they'd like to follow up with meetings, but we're waiting for further communication. A couple, so we have varying levels of response back from those letters, and we're following up on them. But the projects that I think there were maybe 6 or 7 ultimately different projects that we let them know about actually. And the Columbia Corridor Industrial Land E-Zone project was one. The forthcoming future kind of North Reach project to look at the floodplain, how to apply the floodplain regulations, as well as address some other things related to the Greenway overlay and river environmental zones. So they're about, and there's a couple of projects we're working on even in the Central City area. We provided a list of about, I can't remember if it was, I think it was about 6 projects that we invited them to let us know if they want more information on, and projects related to the industrial land and river geographies are on that list. So, and I can provide you with more detail separately. I don't have the accounting of everything off the top of my head, but I can certainly let you know more if you're interested.
Yes, definitely. We would love to know all the details. So appreciate that follow-up. That sounds great. Yeah, and then also, we just around the, reclamation of land and then the idea of tribes having expertise in salmon habitat restoration and natural resources. So how can the city think ahead about like transactions of land that are in those opportune zones along the rivers, along the slough, to bring in expertise from the tribes in a formal way, right? And in a fair way where it's like invitations to all the tribes. If one tribe express interest, that means the opportunity should be sent out to all of the regional tribes. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing that to the table, Cassie. Appreciate it. Steph.
Hi, team. Actually, I'll just go to the one with apologies. I have to hop in a few minutes related to the transportation system plan because that's just kicking off. I'm curious where these two processes intersect and what the conversation has been about linking these two. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we've started the coordination process with PBOT to talk about this. They recently did their update of the freight master plan. And the TSP update is the opportunity to take the projects identified in the freight master plan and put them sort of on what they call their funding investment plans. And they have, there's two levels to that. There's what's called the constrained funding list.
Yeah,
So
constrained and unconstrained, right?
yeah, and so that the conversation is to figure out which freight projects sort of get that higher priority and how they fit into the constrained funding list.
Yeah. So I guess granularly my question, so I serve on the community advisory committee and we just kicked off a couple of weeks ago. So like is the EOA, like does the EOA and the freight sync up happen as part of that? Is it a separate process or? I'm just curious about timeline because it's a 2-year timeline. We're looking at what, 6 months of the CAC, 6 to 8 months of the CAC. So does and this the EOA has been kind of a moving target for a while now. Does my question make sense?
I think the timelines are syncing up now. If you think about, you know, the way the EOA will develop and emerge and sort of, as to Corky's point, make the case for these types of investments. It's opportune for us to make the case for the freight investments and how it fits into the larger economic development picture. At the same time, PBOT is actually doing the TSP update, and that they can then take those identified needs and put them into the mix with all the other transportation needs. So it's a way, whereas, you know, when they did the freight master plan, it was just a list of projects without any sort of priorities. Or you know, this is the way to, again, sort of reinforce those priority freight projects and try and push them onto that that constrained funding list as part of the TSP process.
And you all are having staff to staff discussions.
Yes.
Does that
helps
answer your
to-
question?
Yeah.
Not fully.
I think maybe like just to say like that staff to staff conversations happen, but like also there's a public, just maybe more of a comment, like that there is a community advisory committee that is moving forward. I would hope that stakeholders at this body are going to be involved in the CAC, so that it just, because sometimes there's different processes, you know, that have different priorities, and when we're speaking in different rooms, it can get a little messy in terms of what is prioritized. So perhaps
That's
it's
a
more
good,
comment.
good point, and we should look at opportunities to give the snapshot of the EOA and the importance of the freight
Investments.
Investments.
Yeah, to the TSP CIC, or sorry.
Yeah.
The Community Advisory Committee, CAC. I think that would actually be a great opportunity to step.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for the idea. Corky.
So that connects us back to what one of the things Ben said earlier, and maybe this is in the next part of the presentation, which is, let's say we crudely boil this whole thing down to E-zones versus BIPOC jobs, you know, for example. If we expand the E-zone and anticipate an increase, or at least a sustainability of BIPOC jobs based on these strategies, but then the strategies don't come through 3 years down the road, we pull the E-zones back? Well, no, don't do that. So, you know, what assurances do we have, again, if that's coming up, just say so.
It's not today, but we know that is an issue about, you know, the timing, the sequencing of the implementation of all of these. And I think it is
The sequencing of timing, but also a guarantee that regardless of timing, that it will happen.
Right. Yeah, we know that that is an issue.
Tom, it's time to move on because we have about
Okay.
hour 10, so
Okay.
thank you all.
Okay.
Actually, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's one question I wanted to ask this
Oh, yeah,
group
please.
about different strategies. Can we just go back to the strategies for the, sorry, I slipped my mind. We have been talking about, but we haven't really reflected in the materials significantly yet, the notion of workforce development and job training and how that could investing in workforce and job training could be considered a strategy for industrial jobs or other jobs. And so I just actually wanted to get a little bit of a read or feel from this group about, is that, there are existing programs. Are there deficiencies in any of those programs? Would additional funding in any of those programs be helpful? Is there anything that we could talk about that could be elevated and reflected through the EOA conversation? Because I think that's something we have not talked about.
And I see Kate has her hand up. I'm guessing she has some insights on that as well.
Yes, we've been having long conversations about this over here. Employers are having a hard time finding talent and retaining that talent, and also having a hard time navigating our workforce development system. I know that Metro is doing a big study right now. Multnomah County has their own group working on it. So it's something very priority in everyone's minds. One thing that we would like to see for metals and machinery, especially, a lot of the training happens on the job. So how are we helping employers invest in their employees? A lot of folks actually just recruit anyone who is willing and able to come to work, and then they will train them there. So if there are more programs where we can support employers in getting reaching out to the programs that exist, but also giving them the means to really provide career pathways for their employees and get more connected to the overall programs.
Do you see that, Kate, as being something we could formulate into a strategy exploring these pathways? I mean, so maybe you could. I'll help to hear from others in this group, but maybe you could help us and we can work together to figure that out. And I'd love to
and I
hear.
think Benton at Vigor actually has a great program that they've developed with PCC. So I would love to hear too from Benton if there are thoughts that he has.
Hey, I'm writing down bullets, but I just want to, Patricia, I want to ask you a question about that point. How do you see investment in workforce development as an investment strategy for an outcome that protects the existing jobs and the future project? Because we're assuming these jobs are going to get created if we essentially allow for enough land to do it.
Right.
But how does workforce development investment feed into that?
I mean, I think that's part of what I want to talk about, but I mean, just to the point of what Kate said, if businesses that exist already are having a hard time, finding workers, how do we ensure, because I mean, land supply is obviously important, but having the workers the businesses, the businesses need to have the workers to stay in business, and, workers are looking for the training to do the jobs that are available, right?
Yeah.
Or that we want to try to grow in the region, knowing what our strengths are and what businesses we have existing. And so, and it could improve, hopefully it could improve the amount of employment that we see in our industrial areas. We could grow the jobs within the existing lands and within existing businesses potentially. So that's what I'm trying to
So I do have some thoughts. So there's a couple things I would say, and I'll just be very direct on one of them. I don't think this spider web of a system needs another player. I'll just, but and I think Kate is shaking her head too. Like it is, its biggest problem is that it is way too complicated to figure out how to navigate. And so, well, actually what we need is a massive simplification of the process. And it's actually the reason that Vigor, as Kate alluded to, boosts a facility for PCC at our site was because it was too hard to figure out where to go find people to put them through a training process. And so we basically just determined almost 15 years ago that we had to just do it ourselves, which is just not something most businesses can do. So I would say, I don't think that needs another player, which is not to say that there's not a role for the city here. So a couple of things I'd say. And part of the earlier conversation we had about the particular density of various industrial sites is one of the challenges for a big business is we cannot take someone in our facility and train them on site. They have to be certified for the most part before they come work for us. They have to have gone through a certification program or a union apprentice program or something like that. And one of the challenges we have is there's not enough strength in our smaller business sector to provide an employment pipeline to big businesses. And so that is something I think that could be painted by Prosper or someone within the city as this is what the career track can look like. And then kind of that is where I do think an incentive for a higher density, smaller business makes a lot of sense. It's like those employees are going to work for 2 to 5 years, and then they're going to like you do in almost every other employment sector, right? You move up to various things, right? And that's not really how it works here in Portland in the industrial sector. So that's one. And then if we're being very honest, the biggest challenge that we face as a sector for attracting employment is the reputation of our sector, which is generally not our fault. Like, all right, like, and it's come out in this room, right? It is generally industrial businesses are bad. They are dirty. They are unsafe. I think you've heard me say before, the most dangerous thing most industrial employees do every day is get in their car and drive to work, just like you and me. Like we have a reputation problem that is driven largely by the perspective of the industry drawn by, in many places, our local governments. And so the way our governments talk about us is going to be actually the biggest driver in whether or not we can attract employment from local places. And we said it's elected officials. And then I think related to that is a better, and this is another place where I think the city can help, is a better understanding of what that job is. Like there's a comment earlier about we should only invest in expansion of clean energy or clean industry jobs. Well, a metals manufacturer is a clean industry job, right? It's a current, if you go work at Gunderson or Advanced American today, that is a clean, they are going to build wind turbines, right? And so how we make it clear that the industry as it exists today is a very good opportunity for somebody and an opportunity to work in the future. It's a messaging problem that I think is largely driven not by the businesses in the sector that we can actually, quite frankly, use help with.
Thank you,
That's great.
Benton.
Well, seriously, I know Deb's looking at the clock, me
Yep.
too. And all this is true. And there are a number of reasons to spend a lot of time focusing on this. I mean, it's equity, it's reduction and gentrification, it's improving carbon reduction, equipment, all sorts of things. But we're talking land supply, right? So in terms of land supply, I think the connection between the jobs equation and land supply is pretty darn weak. It's very basic. The more acres you have available, the more of those jobs. And the less acres you have, the less of those jobs. Can I do something with the jobs, with the workforce that maybe increases the density of the jobs on the acre? Oh, yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's a very, very weak connection unless somebody can really enlighten me how I'm way off there. So in terms of land supply, as important as it is, I don't really see the connection there, except that the more land you have, the more jobs you have.
Yeah, Corky, and I think acknowledging that our land supply is tight and it's not, it's not going to grow significantly, right?
But you reduce significantly.
What we're trying to figure out is, are there other ways to maximize job generation and capacity for jobs in our.
Not if you
in
don't
all
have the
of our
land.
Yeah,
Okay.
Patricia, can I just say on that, and kind of one other thing is employees are just like employers, which is they're looking for a demand signal. So if the signal is that we're going to have enough land for the employers to exist, employees will track themselves toward those jobs, which is just a reality. And so if we say that we're going to be a city that recognizes our growth is going to be in the industrial sector, and we roll a prosperous plan to invest in that sector, then the city can then parallel that with, hey, let's make sure that we're working in our schools and our community organizations with that. These are good jobs and they're going to be there. And I think it's important for all of us here to understand, yes, is it hard to find future employees in the city of Portland? Yeah, but if we have open jobs, we're going to fill them. It'll just be people who are not from here. And that's not good for the local economy, right? So we would rather fill it with people who live in Portland too. So how we sort of change that dynamic so we're not recruiting not just from what I call the donut hole around Portland, but everywhere else in the country to get people to come work in our companies would be really helpful.
All right. Thank you all. Really appreciate those perspectives. Let's.
Okay, so just to recap, reminder, on the natural resource policy option side, we have the environmental overlay zones along the Columbia corridor. Decisions there around, high and medium significant natural resources, 25-foot setbacks or 50-foot setbacks, conservation zones or preservation zones. On the North Reach, we've talked a little bit about the floodplain requirements and the river setback and the river environmental overlay zone on riparian resources. On the tree code, we've talked about how the planting and preservation requirements currently do not apply to the heavy industrial zone. Should they apply? Should it be just planting or should it be preservation? And so what we've done is bundle each of those decision points into basically a high, medium, low combinations. Lean in heavy on the protection measures is a high. Have a light touch is a low. And so with each of those decision points is a change in that constraint discount factor. And is how it plays out in this model. In terms of community impacts, again, looking at that industrial residential edge, and looking at the types of uses that occur, and do we want to add enhanced buffer and development standards or even use restrictions in sort of that 500-foot area that is immediately adjacent to residential zoning. We have really two options. One is that looks that the high option is we're looking at all of the sites, regardless of size. And a second option, the lower option is, well, we're only looking at the larger sites that might be a more impactful business and have more impact on the adjacent community. I will say with this one and with the North Reach and the tree code, much like the investment strategies, these are future decisions. We don't have all the details worked out just yet. What we're trying to do is sort of have the EOA anticipate that future decision, so that when we get around to working out all of those details, we don't have to update the EOA again. And so this helps set some of the parameters for that future decision making. I also think that future decision point sort of begins to address, Corky, your question about sequencing and assurances. Like, yes, we're going to do a sort of a joint decision, EOA, Columbia Slough environmental overlay zones. But when we get around to actually making a North Reach decision, it's like, well, what have you done the freight infrastructure investment? Have you done the permit streamlining? What have you done on that other side, right? So So they're built into this is a sequence of decisions where we can sort of keep asking that question. Like, how are we doing that? We expected to do permit streamlining or brownfields or freight infrastructure. Are those there yet? Well, maybe that tempers a decision about the tree code or something like that.
And I guess what I'm wondering is, how do we keep that, right there at the top of the page? Because you know how this goes sometimes. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not intentional. The follow through is forgotten. Oh, we were going to do that, but it just fades away. So, how do we not let it fade away?
So part of that is on us and part of that is on you, but we can always point to the EOA as saying, look, this is what we were anticipating. This hasn't happened yet. So, are you sure we're gonna, are you sure you're gonna want to make, a heavier decision or a more impactful decision or the timing of that decision? But there's a document, the EOA, to point to, and those future decisions have to make findings against the EOA to say like, well, how is this fitting with what was anticipated in the EOA? Is there a question or a hand?
All good.
Okay.
There was a question about PLI and there's been many answers about it.
So again, this different way of looking at that previous scenario planning combinations, different visual graphic here. But as I said, what we've done is, okay, different areas of emphasis. So do we take a light touch on natural resources or a medium touch, or do we lean in on full protection measures? Do we think, well, we're in a budget cycle, it's going to be constrained budget. We're not going to be able to be very active on the economic development investment side. So maybe we assume a lower level, what is possible there. And when we begin to look at, and as I said, each of these low, medium, high come with varying constraint rates depending on what you're doing or not doing. And we run those through our model, then we get different, it has different impacts on industrial capacity. But where we wind up with is in these combinations is anywhere from number 3 here, which is sort of do a lot on natural resource protection, on community impacts, not so much on investment. We're down to 1,018 acres. If we want to go all in on economic number 9 here, maybe, we're going to lean in on investments, but have a lighter touch on regulation. We can get up to 1,200 acres. And this is sort of that future supply. Another way to think about this and sort of where we ultimately wind up is sort of these different combinations. And again, this is just a high level theme approach. So on the left-hand side, a very passive approach where we're not going to have a lot of resources. Therefore, we're not going to do very much. So we're going to have a light touch on regulation, and maybe we can do a little bit of investment. We've done a little bit of investment, things like transportation infrastructure, but it's not much. But that combination, a little bit of added regulation, a little bit of added investment, sort of offset each other and gets us back to sort of where we're at today in that 1,100 range. If you look at those middle ones, those sort of emphasize the two ends of the spectrum, if you will. I'm going to lean in heavy on sort of protective regulatory measures, or I'm going to, under growth, I'm going to emphasize economic development, and I'm going to take a lighter touch with regulation. And then on the aggressive is like, no, we're gonna take it all on. These are important issues. We're gonna lean in and try and do everything. You know, again, the higher regulatory touch combined with a higher commitment to investment sort of offset each other in terms of the capacity analysis. And when we get to Benton, to your earlier point, when we get to the discussion draft, we'll also try and for each of these quantify or characterize the impact to that larger industrial land base. This is strictly looking at future development. So discussion time. You know, what, you know, we're looking at how do we make these trade-offs? You know, what do you think is realistic? Is there alignment? What is realistically achievable, you know, given current conditions? And, you know, we're thinking in, you know, the other thing is, you know, we do this periodically. This is not a once in 20-year time frame, right? And we respond to the conditions, but for the next 5 to 7 years, what does that future look like?
I'm gonna ask a question on that point.
Yeah.
Given the, I guess, delayed timeline on this one, is the city anticipating doing this again in 2030? Like, when does the city anticipate doing this?
That's a
More like 7 years.
good, yeah, good question. I think it, I mean, in the delay timeline, like with this was frankly responding to external circumstances, right? And we spent a year looking at baseball stadiums on Terminal 2. And then we had the pandemic, and then we had the recovery, and you know, so I think it is, the timing of that is driven more by the circumstances and what the needs are. You know, and the EOA is that long-term look of where we're going and what we have. The Prosper Portland and the Advanced Portland strategy, that is more of the short term, and they do that on a regular 5-year basis kind of thing. So I think we would be looking at those larger trends, and if we're seeing something different, or the Advanced Portland is saying we're headed in a different direction and we need sort of new land use actions, then that might be the reason to trigger or update. But, you know, we have, but there is that sort of monitoring and performance element to be aware of what's going on. So
I would also add it, Tom, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but you know, there are rolling and periodic updates to the forecast. And to the extent that the forecast changes significantly, also that or not, right? That also has bearing on how quickly we may need to revisit any of this. If the forecast doesn't change, you know, significantly for some amount of time, then that's another indicator that we're probably okay, covered by what we've been doing over the course of this process. So those are all the factors that we're going to determine that.
Would imagine 2030 might. Next 5 years will likely be.
Yeah. We also think about it in terms of business cycles and wherever we're headed, right? And where we're at in recession or a recovery, or how the economy, the regional economy has changed. You know, Intel recovered, it's Nike recovered, you know, there are all those factors that sort of lead into where we need to, how we assess that monitoring and update.
Cassie, question, input.
This is just maybe too large scale of a comment, but I'll voice it anyway, because just sort of channeling Bob Salinger's prior, you know, thoughts about how can you like continue to have the underlying assumption that there's a shortage of industrial land when entities like the Port of Portland and entities like the Port of Portland have converted and upzoned their industrial land to commercial use. So how are we able to kind of rethink that underlying assumption in how we think about this, the whole framing of this?
I mean, I think that is.
Sorry.
All right.
Go ahead.
You know, that is a good point. I mean, I think this accounting is sort of how you measure or decide whether or not it provides the frame for that decision as to whether or not you want to convert industrial land to other types of uses. And the last, I will note, like the last EOA that was done in 2016 and formally adopted in 2018 had 111 acre surplus of industrial land. And that gave us a little bit of wiggle room to come along and do things like apply the tree standards to the IG and EG zones. It allowed us to rezone some manufactured dwelling parks that had industrial zoning on it and were sort of under threat of being displaced and converted. It allowed us to make the decision to convert or change the zoning at Montgomery Park, which was like on the order of 20 acres of industrial land that ultimately changed designation. So I think that sort of future conversion question is not accounted for. You know, future conversions are not accounted for in these policy decisions. And those decisions will have to either fit into the EOA some way, mitigate, or we'll have to redo the EOA to figure out, is that what we want to do or not?
Kate?
Could you remind me what that acreage was for the BLI in 2016 for industrial land? Do you have it off the?
Do you know that, Sam? It is. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was similar to what we have today.
Yeah, I think it was roughly 12.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I just I think this conversation, I think with Cassie is really important for our just like general understanding of how the difference between the need for a critical mass of industrial land and how any individual landowner behaves. And what you described, Cassie, is actually also one of our challenges. Like I don't want to ding our good friends at the Port who are members of Working Waterfront, but like it is true that the highest and best use of a parcel related to employment land is different than the highest value sale use of a parcel of land. So it makes all the sense in the world for any individual landowner, if they're not using a piece of land for some purpose, to try to get it converted to something they can use to sell it at a higher price. And I actually recall sitting next to Bob and having that conversation. Like that was one of his fears actually, was that if we basically rezoned and upzoned land in industrial areas and built housing on it, we were taking away the industrial land that would employ the people who would live in the housing, right? And so like that's the fear of the broader industrial land conversation is we know based on the projection of jobs that we need a certain amount of industrial land. But if you're an individual landowner, it is a good business decision to try to get your land converted and sell it. But the problem here for our businesses is that land will never go back.
Yep.
It will forever be too expensive to do industrial work on it ever again. And so I don't like the slippery slope argument because it is what it is, but like that is real. Once it gets converted away from, in this town, IH zoning, that's it for an industrial use forever, right? So that is the challenge that we have.
I think it's an important point for everybody to remember too. You know, one important point is we're essentially out of industrial land, so that changes the economic equation a little bit. It's not like you could move somewhere else.
Can't find it all.
There's nowhere else, you know, so that's a really important thing to remember. But also what Ben just pointed out, we run into this with some regularity at our association where our members will come to us and say, hey, I have this area that I had it used as an office adjacent to my manufacturing facility, but now I've moved the office somewhere else. I'd like to get that rezoned so I can sell it as office space. You know, can you help us out? And our flat out reply to them is, I'm sorry, no. You know, because that takes away, we start going down that slope. It's a concern. It's perfectly legitimate for that property owner to say, hey, I'd like to rezone, you know, but we have to resist that.
Yeah. And I think that's to Corky's earlier point, like one of the things that we need to do in the EOA in the broader document is to come back to this idea of middle wage jobs for people without college degrees and the equity element on why it's important to maintain that industrial land base for those good jobs, for those career ladder jobs. And we're starting to see that, right? Even on the housing side, right? You have groups like Oregon Smart Growth saying, hey, we need to look at the EOA and we need to grow these good jobs so people can afford the housing. You know, the income side of the equation has always been part of the affordability question as well. And so this is the EOA becomes that adopted document that we can then continually point to, like, well, are you sure about that? Are you sure you want to do, it's going to have these impacts.
Just for those of you in the room, Kate looked up the EOA from 2016 and there was 1,796 acres of industrial land supply.
Is that right? 1,700?
870, basically. So back, would you mind flipping to
Yeah,
your
yeah,
discussion
yeah.
questions real quick?
Yep.
Sort of checking in with you all again, sort of thinking about trade-offs, priorities, ways for collaboration. Obviously, we're not looking for you to weigh in on a decision or something today. This will be framed up for broader conversation and come back to you for more deliberation. But, you know, what are the impacts you're seeing of these different policy scenarios? We've touched on some of those already. Maybe you can sort of talk to what those trade-offs are in regard to middle wage job opportunities, climate resilience, economic competitiveness. What strategies do you think matter most? We've heard from you a bit about that already as well. And where can alignment unlock sites? So additional thoughts on any of those? Yeah, Cassie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it could be low-hanging fruit for y'all to see if you can change whatever policy the city has on the foreclosure side for industrial sites and pilot it with the Stanley Herman site, which we've been trying to troubleshoot this site with all the agencies and one of the tribes and we're stuck. So there's a lot of like interest in holding that space for key salmon habitat. It's kind of the only opportunity site that's holistically has huge potential for high standards salmon habitat restoration in the Portland Harbor Zone. That's all. Thank you.
Idea, thank you. Anyone else have additional items to add on these? Yeah, Micah.
Yeah, I want to just share that I hear from Corky and from Benton on the impact of conversion and how it does not come back in regards to upzoning of industrial land towards other uses, and completely agree with that, and think we should be collectively troubleshooting ways through investments or other ideas to curb that. And at the same time, I think we need to consider on the natural resource side that it's the same dynamic. And when we lose those natural resources, whether it's actual land designated for protection, or the actual resources, whether they're trees or riparian areas or floodplains, we lose that permanently in a lot of cases. And so I think we need to, as we are embarking on working together on this initiative, I think we have to lean into sort of ways that we can work together to both protect both things, both the zoning land base of industrial lands and the existing natural resources that are in place, and that's why I think collectively we should be leaning in towards, especially in the shorter term, the aggressive strategy of protecting what we have and investing in what we have and making what we have better. And yeah, I think that's just a general observation I'd like to share.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts about reflections on what Micah just said, sort of leaning more heavily on the invest more, protect more option? Yeah, go ahead, Corky.
Well, and I think this fits into the which strategy is most what's realistic. And we ran into this last time we looked at expanding in currently developed sites, old Columbia corridor. If you, it's like, all right, you expand the E-zone, and this is conversation. Bob, if he was here, he'd be saying, yeah, same thing. So you expand the E-zones onto a parking lot. And that's the realistic part. What did you actually gain? I can tell you what you lost in terms of equity, in terms of economic opportunities, but what did you gain from a wildlife habitat? Not a whole lot. And we had this conversation with staff at the Port of Portland and the previous iteration of this, where one BPS staff person said, I asked the question, 100 years from now, what would you like this E-zone to look like? And one said, I want it to be a thriving wildlife habitat. And the other staffer on the other side of me said, oh, we still want this area to be a thriving industrial, economy. I'm like, well, yeah, literally stuck in between. Yeah. We don't do a good job of addressing the reality of those constraints. If we're going to expand the E-zone, who's going to turn that into good habitat? It's paved right now. And you had a picture, slide 2, I think, was a really good example of that. Yeah. What's the reality of that going forward? But then there's something really missing here, I think, that I'd like to have a conversation. This is the one I'm looking for. Conversation he wanted too, which is how can we maintain those jobs, maintain that economic benefit by not chipping away at that land supply, which is so constrained right now, and then take that economic benefit and put that to use for the environment. So use that economic benefit, build on that, to actually take parcels along the Willamette River, for example, and turn that into our string of pearls that we wanted to do, which unfortunately kind of became a whole cluster of pearls. But the idea is still there, and you can't do that without a good economy. And so there's a nexus here that we're not discussing very well, and we're not discussing it very well because it's not a tool in BPS's toolbox. I get it. I understand that. But it would be nice if we did make that.
Micah, some additional reflection. Thank you, Corky.
Yeah. Thanks, Corky. And I agree with a lot of that. And I think that the parking lot example is a great one because if an E-zone is expanded into an existing parking lot, that parking lot for that specific use is grandfathered in, and it also at the same time provides a more clear opportunity for that existing business to convert some of that space in and find find public funds to do so, whether it's new expanding funding sources, both at the state and the local level for green infrastructure, where we are really understanding and have deployed funds, whether it's through DLCD's new green infrastructure grant program or PSEF's green infrastructure program that can provide incentive and tangible money for that conversion. That would have a detrimental or a very small impact on that local business of converting 1 or 2 parking spots away into a new absorbent green infrastructure that can employ a new workforce for that conversion while benefiting the owner of that property and having a minimal impact on the economic operations of that facility, losing 1 or 2 parking spots, let's say, for example. And so I think the expansion or the right sizing of the environmental zones, which in a lot of cases this is, where it's remapping and looking at existing resources and adjacency, I think provides us that opportunity to create economic benefit in the green workforce and an incentive and a benefit to that local landowner, which is an industrial business.
If I may, I'm sorry. I hate to, Micah, we should get together and have a conversation. I think you touched on something I think is a really great idea. Can we build into this, for example, if we're going to expand an E-zone, can we build into it funding to actually make that good habitat? You know, that would be a benefit moving forward. But I want to real quickly speak to, because this is extremely important, the idea that the parking lot is grandfathered in. Not really. Industrial businesses constantly evolve. That's the whole point. You don't want to be working at a business that's using 1950s equipment. It's heavily polluting. It's very dangerous. You don't want that. Well, what do I do to change my equipment? I add a compressor. Where do I put that compressor? Outside the building. I don't have any space over here because I'm right up against the street. I got to do it over on the E-zone side. I cannot get a building permit to put the compressor in if I'm in a P zone. Might be able to do it in a C zone. So, you know, we're getting into the weeds here. But this is extremely important. Another good example that we pointed out last round of this was a parking lot that the business had started using a night shift. So they needed a light in that parking lot to move their equipment out there. They intentionally put the light next to the slough. It was very intentional on their part. If the E zone had been there, C or P, they would have put the light on the other side of the parking lot, shining into the slough. This is the problem. You know, industrial businesses are constantly evolving. So when you say it's grandfathered in, I'm sorry to an industrial business owner, that's just uninformed.
All right, some ideas for areas of alignment and then also some cautions about the many details that really matter and those inherent trade-offs. And as we've talked about at prior meetings, a lot of it is site by site and sort of where those configurations are and where those environmental assets are or could be. Other thoughts or questions on the scenarios, the methodology, anything we need to talk about before this gets published and moving along to a broader audience than this?
I'm trying to reflect on, I think, one area that we have not kind of touched on from a practical standpoint, which is like, how will a business behave under any one of these scenarios, but particularly for the purposes of my point, I'm going to take the community part out, particularly like a medium or high on the first. And because this parking lot conversation is a letter for that, right? It's like actually a perfect example for that with Vigor, which is we had a conversation about putting solar panels, like carport solar in our parking lot, which would not be considered a river dependent use, right? So now we would be subject to all of this, and that would be an extremely challenging thing for us to do because we would be within a setback, right? So when I think about how our business would act, if we actually need to do some type of development at our facility, not covered by a river dependent use specific to us. What we're hoping to do, maybe I use Daimler as a better example, right? They just wanted to build a new building. They went to the city, they got money. in exchange essentially for creating jobs. It's pretty much what we're talking about doing here, right? Any one of these things is a economic development strategy that's designed to create jobs. In that scenario, it seems to me that we should actually directly connect funding sources for whatever mitigation, whatever action the business is required to take to that project that actually makes it pencil for a business, which is what we would do in other places and other zoning types in the city. We would look at what that, is there a potential for some sort of incentive for a business to say, we're going to do something that creates 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 jobs, whatever, those probably high numbers. But all right, the SDC example is a good one. What incentive can we provide to make that possible, right? In this instance, though, we would have essentially, we would call it on our books a liability. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do we cover the liability? And how do we make sure our business can continue to operate the way we have been operating? So I want us to think as part of the answer to this question of how do we protect from the money not being on the table when the regulations go into place, there actually should probably be a direct connection that says, if you're going to do this and a business is going to do a set of development, there has to be some amount of financial incentive connected to whatever mitigation they're required to complete. Otherwise the business doesn't pencil for the businesses, right? Like there one, I think is the point I made about long-term impacts of environmental overlays essentially is it might not happen now, but it's just 10 years from now, we're going to look at that building and go, are we going to tear it down and rebuild it? Probably not. And then it atrophies over time. And that's actually what ends up costing the jobs over time. So I'm getting this in a roundabout way, but it's like, how do we essentially look at an incentive that helps the business deal with the liability they're going to incur as a result of this?
Don't know if you all have thoughts or reflections about making more direct connections between costs and benefits.
I mean, as we've been noting, we're going into a period
Yep.
where there's, difficult budget times. I mean, I think conceptually, we can allude to the need to explore those kinds of, opportunities. And we talked about, I mean, there are some different funding sources. Some of them, are not, the funding may be very limited. So I think we can definitely look into that more and think about how that can at least be alluded to in the document in such a way that if there's interest as a follow-up item, that we can elevate that to work on it more in the future.
I think one way to think about it is there a way to quantify what that liability looks like from an example standpoint for any given parcel, right? Like say a parcel has, 50% coverage of a new overlay, right? And therefore, you could look at a structure on the site and say, if they replace that in 2028, be estimated at this. And then whatever they have to do related to that would be estimated at this, right? Can we at least quantify that so we can say, this is what a business would need to do in order to make that pencil?
I think some of the studies we've been doing attempt to do a little bit of that. I know with the Northreach project and thinking about the floodplain regulations, we are doing economic analysis to understand the incremental additional cost of complying with the floodplain regulations. So, I think we are attempting to do some of that. It's probably not perfect. And I think what you're describing is like the layering of all of these things too. That's helpful, inputs for us to continue to think about and to, reflect on what we're already doing and could we do anything more in terms of just quantifying these things.
And I think specific to the E-zones, what we've been talking about and internal to staff is, in addition to these map changes, are there other code changes that can streamline that process? Like, we've talked a lot about the uncertainty and the expense of the discretionary review process. Show me alternatives and all this. Well, can we look at certain situations and have more what we call a standards process that is more straightforward and you don't have all of that uncertainty around, show me different alternatives, but like if you do this, then you're good to go. And so, and then there's some other questions like around outdoor storage and activity areas and can you or can't you, and in the E zone or the C zone and the transition area. So I think there's a combination of, there could be some regulatory relief that makes, you know, operating inside the E zone a little more straightforward. I think what I also heard from you is that there also could be kind of more technical assistance. Like, you know, can we as staff provide more of that problem solving when somebody went, well, if you did it this way, you know, and not in the moment of the regulatory, but pre-development, hey, you know, you can come talk to this planner and maybe get some different ideas on sort of that win-win between habitat restoration and expansion, business expansion.
The table that you described, like the idea of a table where the different levels of government also that might have some purview over something, that there could be some central place to have that conversation. Like those are all assistance that can help save time and money.
Thank you. We've heard quite a few times today this interest and anxiety might be too strong of a word, but strong encouragement to think about how to make that alignment with funding and the regulatory side sort of absolutely connected. And especially as future decision makers get there, they can't just unbundle and not quite understand what the ramifications to that are. I see in the chat, thank you, Micah, says he's definitely interested in having a conversation about how this group can strategize on existing funding sources, potential implementation of future sources via next PSEP CIP that can be leveraged along with code changes, regulatory relief to facilitate existing industrial building upgrades, et cetera, to meet all those things that we're all trying to do. So it sounds like a lot of interest in that. I don't know how that conversation happens or when, but then we definitely hear you about this. I mean, there's a real opportunity that comes with that. The economic opportunity part is sort of using those levers in the right way to get at the combined values we all have. And
I'm glad you brought up PSEP because I actually will throw a specific thing on the table. Micah, I'm glad you brought that up because it is like a perfect example of where the city process does not work for business. Right. So initially money for PSEP couldn't go to businesses. Right. And now we kind of found some ways through the clean initiative. I'm trying to figure that out. We have two very massive hurdles. One of them is navigating the concept of community benefit. And you brought up workforce development. I think businesses would view that as a community benefit. Right. And so if built into any program that a business is working on that is PSEP eligible otherwise, workforce development was considered the community benefit, that'd be huge. But right now that's the thing we're currently trying to figure out. Bigger problem is there is almost no major investment that a business will make that is a capital investment of the scale we're talking about that has a 5-year timeline. Almost none. It has 7, 10, or longer. And particularly if we're going to spend, if PSEP's going to spend 10 million and we're going to spend 70 million, like that is a long timeline. But right now that requires a 5-year project timeline. So we can't meet it. We just practically cannot meet it. And so looking at that part, those two particular policies in PSEP, I think would greatly benefit our ability to do some of the kinds of large scale projects at our sites that would really impact the goals I think that PSEP has laid out. Actually, like there's a lot of small stuff, very important, critical, but the kind of large scale things that we could do obviously have much greater impact over time.
That's an interesting avenue for us to explore. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, Courtney.
So going forward, got a couple of questions I'd love addressed in future documents is when we're talking about wildlife habitat, I mean, we're in compliance right now. Title 13. We're okay. Furthermore, it doesn't have to be any additional wildlife habitat doesn't have to be in industrial areas. It could be anywhere within the city.
Or the floodplain stuff.
A little bit different. Yeah. Yeah.
Floodplain is about.
Glad to take that up,
So-
but again, even there, we're talking about in compliance with FEMA or in compliance with FEMA plus some additional, so that's what I'm getting at is right now in Title 13. Well, we passed the comp plan. Comp plan has the current E-zones.
Right.
And they are in compliance.
But the phased work to update the floodplain regulations, as you know, we've talked many times in this group and in other settings, and we're happy to go through it with you again. The phased work to update floodplain regulations to be consistent with the BIOP, which is about Endangered Species Act and wildlife habitat. That's ongoing, and the industrial areas, as you know, are the next areas, as we've been discussing. The North Reach is the next area that we have to tackle because those rules are not in that area.
I apologize if I oversimplified. My point was we have a comp plan in place. The comp plan addresses Goal 5, addresses Title 13, and we are in compliance with that.
That's too simplified. With respect to Title 13, our compliance, Jeff, the certification from Metro anticipated a future decision for us to make the adjustments like we are proposing in the E-zone for better alignment.
And where I'm getting with this is the concern with this whole process is that if we take away too much industrial land, then we are out of compliance with other goals. Specifically, Patricia, this gets back to what you started the whole meeting off with. Very good point. You said, hey, there are other sectors out there. We're honing in on industrial. Why is it we're honing in on industrial? For several reasons. One is that's what we have a limited land supply of, so that the equation changes a little bit. And in addition, that's where we get our biggest bang for the buck in terms of equity, in terms of traded sector income, in terms, all these great things in terms of reducing gentrification, all these things we want to do. If we want to reduce our carbon emissions without going bankrupt, we do it in the industrial sector. I mean, this is great stuff. So that's why we're focusing on it. So my question that I haven't really seen addressed here that I think would be really informative for me is with whatever recommendations you come up with that move forward, how much less equity would the city have with that level of wildlife habitat expansion, for example? I mean, because that's kind of what I don't mean to do, but that's kind of what it boils down to, right? So, and how much less traded sector income or, how much reduced is our economy with this? That's, I think, speaks to our concern about being out of compliance with our goals and times. So that's what I was trying to get at, is that's the real concern. Can you look at each recommendation and say, here's the number on reduced equity that we can get? I would love it. I was print about this the other day. I would love it if we could also put a number on how much gain we would get with wildlife habitat. How much gain to the economy would that provide? That gets a little trickier. I'd love to see that. That would be great. Now we're really talking. We can sit down and say, well, that's worth it, But right now, let's talk about what we would lose under each scenario.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about when the North Reach planning process might begin. Sherry is wondering about that. Do you all have a timeline? Yeah, Patricia.
So I think that there's a lot of internal kind of technical work to do on that project. And there's also additional information and data to gather from individual property owners as it relates to individual sites. So typically we offer site visits for sites where there are natural resources in order to align, if people have questions about where we're showing those resources versus where they actually are on the site. So I think there's probably going to be some movement kind of like from in September to initiate the process for getting information out to property owners to see if they're interested in site visits, and that's going to be a first phase. Probably any further, you know, kind of external activity around that project will not happen until kind of next year, probably early next year. I mean, that's our general thinking on timeline right now. Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
So
Sherry,
this is Sherry. So what I'm hearing is the process would happen in 2026, early 2026 would begin to update that North River Reach.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
and then I see your other question. Tom's gonna follow up with you about that. Micah,
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I have the FEMA buy-up stuff, but I can't quite remember the exact document or slideshow or whatnot where someone just referred to this group is proposing this. So thank you.
you can follow up.
Yeah.
And then Mike, I see you have a couple of comments. Do you want to bring those in the room? And then I think we should move to wrapping up.
Yeah, just to note that the rest of the city already has many of these protections or overlays that industrial lands do not or are exempted from. So it's not that, from my perspective, it's we're removing the exemptions, whether that's for Title 11 or embarking on updates like the E-zone update process, which the rest of the city's E-zones have partaken in, or coming into compliance with the ESA, the biological opinion on the on FEMA floodplain. So I don't think it's fair to say that we're asking industrial lands to do more. We're actually asking them to do what the rest of the city is doing.
Okay, conversations to be continued. Thank you, Micah. Tom, do you want to do a quick recap of what happens next? I know you said at the beginning.
So this was all good feedback for us. We will continue to write up what we're calling the discussion draft. When you see that, you'll see much more detailed information about the employment forecast and the buildable land inventory, the strategies. And then we'll start our public outreach process, and that will include all of you and look for you to help us connect to the broader community. We'll also be here as resources to continue this conversation, to answer your questions, and again, just keep taking in that input. And then hopefully sometime in early October, we'll reconvene all and share what we've heard and where we think as staff we're headed, and get some feedback on that, and continue just check in as to where we're at in the process.
Questions? Okay, getting close to the end here. Thank you all for your time and attention and opinions today. Appreciate that. And we'll be in touch, but see you in October-ish.
This was really great discussion today.
It was.
And there were really good ideas that came out. So we really appreciate that. This is kind of the substance that we've been looking for through this process. So I feel really good about. Okay.
Yeah.